Welcome to the Atheists of Florida YouTube channel. We are pleased to offer some of the most significant speakers and profound issues of our times. If you like today's video, please hit the like button. If you have already subscribed, thank you. If not, you know what to do.
So we can get into to our talk. So I'm talking today on fascism in the United States. I'm going to be talking about the media, the notion of crisis, and democratic collapse. So we're going to start out by talking about what fascism is, the role of crisis, democratic collapse, the media's role, and then of course we'll kind of roll back to where the United States stands right now. So I wanted to kind of start out by thinking at least just kind of more broadly about what fascism is. And so I've linked to the sources that I'm using. If these are at all interesting to you to go to check out on your own. This initial idea of fascism, which was recently kind of like more or less laid out by Jason Stanley, it's probably the fascism that we're probably most familiar with. It's built around the idea of hierarchy, a lot of that, again, biological determination, right? Recreating this kind of mythic, glorious past, excluding, scapegoating inferior groups, really creating this us versus them dynamic. And because of that, building in with hierarchy, denying the idea of equality, really rallying behind this idea of victimhood, men being, well, let's just say, seen as lesser, and then therefore not being as attractive sexual partners for women, but also being denigrated amongst other men. And of course, fascist strategies range, right? But they in a lot of ways always kind of come back to attacking the media, right? Those that disagree with them. There's a real focus on anti-intellectualism, so not really thinking rationally, thinking through logically with things. Messages are always infused with propaganda. There seems to regularly be a connection with conspiracy theories. There's always a lot of fear and anger, and the solution for all these problems always seem to focus on law and order, authority, people kind of like coming in and more or less knocking heads. If we can keep going here. Sorry, my slides seem to have, there we go. Now, oh, there we go. So I wanted to also take a little bit more of a deep dive into what actually makes up all of the different versions of fascism, because I think Stanley's just kind of like general sum up of fascism, it's probably too closely connected to kind of like the Nazi version of fascism. And although that's the one that people are probably the most familiar with because, you know, for obvious reasons, there are lots of different versions of this. And what I think is important for us to understand, at least in this moment, is that fascism has a huge number in varieties. It is a chameleon in some ways. It can be largely adaptable to whatever kind of environment or situation that it's in. It is, as Umberto Eco defined it, structured confusion. Now, given that fascism can kind of really kind of like find itself in to be, you know, present in so many different situations, there are some kind of, again, core characteristics that are worth focusing on to understand what these kind of major elements of fascism are, so that if we start to encounter these things, we can understand what they're doing and how they're connected to the larger goals of what fascists are trying to accomplish. And so we've already talked about this idea of a cult of tradition, but the cult of tradition is important because what it's trying to do is create kind of a new way of understanding what's going kind of like on in the present moment. And in order to do that, what it does is actually combines different strands of ideas and beliefs together. In many ways, those things don't necessarily have to be connected, or they don't really have to make sense. They can actually kind of like be conflicting with each other. But the reason why that is kind of like tolerated is because all of these things ultimately are supposed to kind of like reveal the truth about why society is the way that it is. In order to, again, kind of like get to this place of understanding why things are the way they are, there is this sense that modernism, the idea that rational thinking has actually brought us to this place. And so if people are upset with the world, they're frustrated by it, part of the fascist project is to lay blame on how we think about and understand the world. And so if we go about a rational understanding, well, then that's how we got into this mess in the first place. So the only way to really kind of like get out of this is to actually start thinking irrationally. Again, and this is helping to connect these ideas of trying to create these new belief systems. Even if they don't make sense, that's kind of the point. It makes sense. There's also a focus on taking action for action's sake. We don't want to think. We don't want to talk. We don't want to read our way, talk our way through out of problems. That's how we get into these kind of patterns of not being able to solve any of these challenges. And so we have to take action. And so when we do that, what this is also trying to do is try to explain why people that are interested in education are really just emasculating themselves. People that think, people that read, people that talk are actually not men. There is this sense that any type of disagreement is treason, and it's based on this idea that disagreement is about how we learn things, right? Disagreement fundamentally improves knowledge. On a most basic level, this is what the scientific method is, right? You figure out what's going on in the world, you update your beliefs, you change, you start to learn, right? But in this sense, that is completely cast aside, right? Because we don't want to learn. There's a real fear of difference. And again, this goes back to this fear of disagreement, right? If people have differences, if people see things differently, then that means that people are different. And that means that there are different ideas, different people out there, and we don't want those people because that's how we got into this mess. There's an awful lot of individual and ultimately social frustration, whether that's class suffering, so people not being paid enough or not working in good enough jobs that provide them with social standing where people are actually impressed by them or respect them. Political defeat, so like your favorite candidate or political party loses elections, or even just the fact that the perception that lower social groups than you in this social hierarchy are actually improving their lives or are doing better than you, that creates a huge sense of frustration. How can these people be doing better than me? Why is the government's attention on improving their lives instead of my life? There always seems to be an obsession with a plot, right? So the whole conspiracy theory idea, we are the reason why we are not happy, the reason why we are frustrated, the reason why things are not going so well has to be because there are larger forces at play pulling strings to prevent us from being able to be happy. There always seems to be this sense of humiliation, and it's brought on by our enemies, and enemies are all everywhere, all the time. And there's this weird dynamic that our enemies have been able to are so strong that they've been able to take control of the different powers of government and the economic system and the social world to make our lives worse, but they're also cowards. And so if we stand up to them and fight them, then they'll immediately collapse. And so that all they need to do is stand up to reject the world that these people have built. And so in this sense, pacifism, not taking action, is what allows your enemies to continue to win, to continue to hold on to that power. And so as a result, everyone is told that they have to become a hero. There is ultimately this idea of this cult of death, that you have to sacrifice yourself for the greater good in order to defeat these people that will never let go unless you stand up to them and are willing to fight to the death to oppose them. This idea of machismo reinforces this idea of action and heroic behavior. There is a general disdain for women because women could never be heroes. Women could never take action, right? Men have to do this. This is the male role. And as a result of that, this idea of maleness and deciding who a real man is means that there is a rejection of non-standard sexual habits. So rejection of LGBTQ people, rejection of people that are transgender, right? Anyone that has any type of sexual kinks or proclivities or whatever else, those people are to be shunned, right? Because again, that is not what being a man is. And if you're not a man, then you can't take action against all of these people that have structured the world against us. Of course, the government is corrupt. Everybody's corrupt, right? All the big institutions that actually have any type of power are absolutely corrupted by our enemies. And of course, in order to make all of this make sense, because of this very clear line of anti-intellectualism, fascists have an impoverished vocabulary. They do not like to use complex words, complex ideas. They don't like to engage in critical reasoning because, again, that forces you to think. It forces you to question. And it's about simplicity, and it's about action, and it's about just accepting what people tell you, and then you do it. It's unquestioned hierarchical authority. And my slides seem to kind of keep delaying here. Let's see if we can kind of get us going. Okay, so I really want to talk about and emphasize the role of crisis when it comes to fascism. There might be an awful lot of fascist tendencies that at least a small number of people in a society always harbor, okay? But the question is, when are the conditions right in a society that allow those people to kind of come out, to become unmasked, to try to actually push forward these ideas into a larger social program? Well, this is when crisis essentially opens those opportunities. So whether it's some type of a systemic breakdown, think like political gridlock, polarization, or governmental institutions being incapable of making decisions, whether there's a larger social transformation that's taking place in society. So that may be the elevation of lower status groups being either recognized or maybe having rights extended to them. This upends that social hierarchy and can actually then kind of make people feel like they're losing ground in terms of the type of status that they wield and hold in society. This can be connected to these larger ideas of moral collapse. Like, why has society basically abandoned its core principles, its major ideas? And what these things are trying to at least put together is that there is a larger sense of urgency and importance, that if we don't stand up to start to do something, then the whole thing is going to collapse. And so it's up to those people that see it, that recognize these problems, to actually do something. And so what's required, especially among the leaders of fascist movements, is to engage in the performance of crisis. Failures have to be identified, and those just kind of mundane things are elevated to crisis by saying that this even small thing is actually related to a larger reason for why things have gone off the rails, why things are bad, and why, if we continue to ignore these things, it's going to result in widespread societal collapse. It's crucial to link an us versus them dynamic. It's all of us being threatened by this group of people that are actually responsible for causing all of these problems. The media becomes, in some cases, an unwitting collaborator, and in other cases, a more than willing collaborator. What's key in the messaging is that it's always a simple solution that is always based on a strong leader being able to solve a problem. There's no clear solution. It's just, if you let this person make all the decisions, that will solve everything. And of course, this is supposed to happen over and over and over and over again, so that every single minor thing that happens in society is elevated to this crisis level, so that no matter what, it becomes as that crisis is endemic. It is constant. It is all around us. And everything that happens is pointing in the same direction, that this whole thing is going to collapse because the wrong people are in charge, and we're finally starting to see their system breaking down. Now, it is sometimes difficult to differentiate crisis from political theater. But when we actually have real crises, their political consequences are incredibly damaging. And they're damaging because what ends up happening is the concentration and the abuse of power. And in particular, judicial and law enforcement agencies present kind of like the most important place to start looking at. Because if the courts and the police, if you will, are captured by these types of groups, then that means that laws can be broken, rights violated, and any type of abuse of power will never actually be investigated and never actually prevented or censored. And what makes this even more frustrating is that in times of crisis, regular everyday people are more than happy to not only tolerate, but also support these types of actions, because they think wrongly that the only way to actually protect themselves or get past this crisis is if these measures are taken. And so I saw someone put in the chat the Patriot Act, and of course, I mean, and I hope as we're talking through these things that lots of different things are popping into your head. I mean, for me, especially thinking about the whole educating heroes thing, and that you've got to go in and you're the only person that can go affect this. This is Kyle Rittenhouse leaving Illinois to go to Wisconsin to be at a protest because the police can't handle this, right? Some kids got to, right? This is the kind of thing that we're seeing. So when these things start to happen, democracy starts to wobble, and ultimately it can collapse. And so the things that we need to be on the real lookout for are when media starts to become intimidated or restricted by government. If these crises start to actually prevent government from working, or they start to actually push out emergency measures that again threaten people's rights and essentially again abuse governmental authority. If minority groups are attacked, scapegoating of foreigners, if groups that organize to try to expand and protect the interests and rights of lots of different people, like Atheists of Florida, if those groups are not allowed to actually meet, if those groups are monitored, if it makes it more difficult to be a part of those groups, that's a big warning sign. When political leaders constantly use the refrain that the current political system is corrupt, that it's broken, that there's no way to fix it, then that communicates to people that maybe we should just burn it all down. When courts or other bodies that are in charge with enforcing and protecting individual rights are expanded, or they're stacked with partisan officials, or if, let's say, in a certain Supreme Court justice dies in like 2016, and then the president tries to appoint their successor, and then the Republican Senate refuses to actually appoint their successor because it's an election year. And then 4 years later, another Supreme Court justice dies 3 weeks before a presidential election, but all of a sudden we forgot about that old rule and now we're going to put our own person onto the bench. One of the big things we definitely have to worry about now, especially in light of the claims about the irregularities in the 2020 election, is modifying rules to impose or eliminate term limits on how election officials in particular do their jobs. We need to make sure that the people that are actually in charge with keeping our system working, and this means elections more than anything else, because that's how our system more or less functions, as those people are being attacked, that is a huge problem. As members of the legislature become essentially less independent and unable to kind of make up their minds on their own, but just become rubber stamps for executive authorities or whoever's in charge, that is also incredibly problematic. When the political opposition finds it difficult to actually speak, or they're attacked for speaking, or shouted down for speaking, or arrested or criminalized for speaking, this is also very concerning. And of course, when leaders try to significantly increase their own control over internal security forces, maybe much like Governor DeSantis's recent proposal for a separate Florida National Guard that is under wholly and totally the governor's specific control and not by shared control with the President of the United States. That might be an example of something like that. So, as I suggested, the media has an important role here because they have a choice whether or not to be willing collaborators in propagating these crises. The more they talk about them, the more likely people are going to start believing them. And so let's look at Fox News, because they, rightly or wrongly, have a reputation of being aligned with the ideological right, and certainly have a reputation for, well, let's just say, putting out questionable news stories. So this is some data from the first 2 years of the Trump administration that is charting how much time and effort the major news organizations were putting into covering Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is not the president. She was not a public figure. She was out of office and she was quiet. And yet Fox News was devoting a significant amount of time to covering her for some reason. And I would like to point out, still do. And of course, Fox talks an awful lot about how the mainstream media, right, because they're propagating some other kind of like false narrative, right? The fake news now, right? And again, this is this key idea of discrediting other sources, right? Anything that we see that we don't like, oh, fake news. Oh, it's just the mainstream media ignoring these important stories that we're focusing on. Of course, Fox spends an awful lot of time on immigration and refugees more than anybody else because these people are coming from outside the country, right? And Fox also spends an awful lot of time compared to everybody else on terrorists or Islamic extremists. And maybe we all remember Colin Kaepernick kneeling. Maybe we remember Vice President Mike Pence going to an NFL game just to walk out after some players kneeled as a form of protest. Because of course, you know, we certainly can't have people kneeling to protest police in their treatment of African Americans. That would be un-American. And so, of course, Fox helps to propagate this national crisis. This is more recent, or at least we've got a kind of like larger span of time here. So this is for the last 10 years. This is when Fox and other news networks use the term socialist or communist. Of course, we are in a big heyday now of there being a constant focus on everything that the left, the Democrats are interested in or talking about. It's the socialists, it's the communists. Of course, critical race theory is a continuing matter of debate. It was a continuing focus of Fox News throughout this entire year. It kind of reached a crescendo after or leading up to the Virginia state elections that brought in a new Republican governor in the state of Virginia. And then immediately afterwards, completely fell off of Fox's radar. So there's a bit of a drumbeat. And then once they get what they want, then they stop talking about it. Again, this is some more recent information. So the top graph here is just looking at how Republicans were approving of Biden on jobs and on the economy. And of course, it was going up because the economy was going well. And then this is when Fox News started talking about inflation constantly. And the more they've talked about inflation, that Republican approval of Biden on jobs and the economy has gone down. It is important for us to know that there is a distinct ecosystem in the media among the right wing. Newsmax, OAN, Fox News. These are watched by people that believe in conspiracy theories. Whereas everybody else who's watching mainstream media, local news, those people do not believe in conspiracy theories, by and large. And of course, we can see that people that believe in conspiracy theories are also less likely to trust their news sources. And so, again, it's this idea of, I don't know who to trust. I don't trust anyone. Everyone's got some type of an agenda. There's always someone behind the scenes pulling the lever or manipulating the process. Now, when we start to, again, think about what the effect in the United States is going to be here, is this all just kind of good entertainment, right? Is Fox just catering to an audience? What's the real effect here? Is there a real concern about what could ultimately happen? Well, we've been, and I should say we, political scientists have been charting every country in the world about how committed they are to liberal democracy. So this is the idea of elections, protecting rights, right? Separation of powers, checks and balances, and the kind of core ideas of what it means to, again, live in a society that is built around self-government and limits on governmental power. We've been seeing that commitment to liberal democracy increase in this country since the 1950s, since the civil rights movement really started kicking off. The United States has become closer and closer to actually being a liberal democracy. And we've just fallen off a cliff in the last 4 years. And so we are now, for the first time, really, since before we started really looking at this, this is really the first time that we've actually seen a significant retreat in the United States' commitment to liberal democracy. Now, again, this might be controversial to some, or it might be confirmatory to others. Democrats in this country have not changed in their level of commitment towards democracy over the last 40 years. But the people that identify as Republicans have, at least since the year 2000, become less and less committed to the idea of democracy. They become more willing to say that we don't actually need to commit to elections. We don't need to commit to rights. We don't need to commit to limits on power, because if we're not getting what we want, then why should we believe in this whole project? And so this idea of where we stand in this country and our kind of wobbling in our commitment to democracy is asymmetric. This is happening on one side. This is not happening on both sides. Now, when we ask people which political party is the greatest threat to democracy, Democrats say it's Republicans. Republicans say it's Democrats. And independents, the people that are stuck in the middle, they're saying it's Democrats. And it's because they're hearing the media drumbeat constantly from Republicans saying that Democrats are the ones that are destroying this country. Now, a lot of this has kind of come into stark relief as a result of what happened in 2020 in the election. And what we've got here is results from a survey in December 2021, so relatively recently, in the last few months, and asking people, is there solid evidence of fraud in the 2020 election? So this is over a year later. Every fraud claim has been debunked. It was absolutely no fraud, right? And when you look overall, the vast majority of people that are surveyed, over 60%, believe that there was no fraud. But Republicans do the other way. And there's a distinct difference between Fox News Republicans and non-Fox News Republicans. Republicans that don't watch Fox News thought that the election was legit. Republicans that watched Fox News did not. Again, same type of setup, same type of comparison of groups, but whose responsibility for the insurrection on January 6th? Who's responsible for the attempted coup and overthrow of our government? Again, about 60% of the country overall believes that Trump bears a great deal or a good amount of responsibility. Republicans don't believe that. And especially Fox News Republicans don't believe that. Well, why doesn't he bear responsibility? We have to look at the protesters, the people that actually went on Trump's, well, let's just say his, guess we don't want to go too far and say his orders, although that's being litigated right now. And that trial is going forward. But he was certainly, well, at least according to the case that's going forward, there's a question whether he was responsible for incitement. So why did these people enter the US Capitol? Again, most people believe that these folks who did this were violent, but not Fox News Republicans. They believe that the people that went to throw down the Capitol, that murdered police officers, that were trying to assassinate elected leaders, were actually mostly peaceful. Right? If we can remember that there was an early refrain that, of course, these people had to be connected to Antifa, that there was a false flag operation, right? Again, conspiracy theory. Now let's talk about those riot suspects and the ones that are specifically from Florida. So these are all the people that were connected to the January 6th insurrection that were from the state of Florida. The people that were the accused rioters were more likely to vote in the 2016 election than regular registered Republicans in the state of Florida. They were more likely to vote in the 2018 election than all other Republicans in the state of Florida. They were more likely to vote in the 2020 primary election than all other Republicans in the state of Florida. And they were more likely to vote in the 2020 election than regular Republicans in this state. The people that were connected to the January 6th insurrection are incredibly politically engaged. And of course, why did they all do this? Because Biden didn't win, right? Even though, again, the majority of the country believes that it was legitimate, Fox News Republicans outpace everybody else by believing the whole thing was illegitimate. Again, now, Republicans that don't watch Fox News in a plurality, said that Biden's election was legitimate. But when you watch Fox News and you're a Republican, you're living in an alternative world. What all this says to me is that we are in crisis. The crises that we've been living through, they keep getting bigger, and they keep reinforcing all of these supposed differences that exist among us. They keep creating more and more enemies. They demand uniformity in response and acceptance that all these things are real and that all these people are wrong. And of course, it promotes heroism that has resulted in some people taking some pretty dramatic action. And of course, it's all underlying this idea of a commitment to irrationality, of accepting conspiracies and accepting a false reality that does not exist. This is in large part driven by the media. The media keeps legitimating these crises. Why do they keep putting on these politicians, these elected figures, these political pundits that keep spreading misinformation, lies? They keep trying to accomplish these goals when there's nothing there. Again, this is all the more concerning because it's having an effect. Republicans are increasingly abandoning their commitment to democracy. And so I want to thank everyone for listening. I see the chat has just blown up, so hopefully we'll be able to talk through things. And I'd love to get your responses and thoughts. I've tried to list some of the sources that I was using, but there's some additional things that I think are particularly helpful and interesting if you're interested in doing some more information. And in particular, that Daniel Ziblatt book, Conservative Parties and the Birth of Democracy, I think maybe actually more relevant, even kind of if we want to do more of a deep dive into why the Republican Party is kind of fallen off the cliff, so to speak. One of the core findings that Ziblatt makes, and this will be the last thing that I say before I'll turn it over to all of you, is that whenever rich people are threatened by the idea that left-wing political parties are really going to engage in redistribution, that are really going to try to advocate for policies that really benefit the working class, the working poor, again, the kind of like bulk of society, conservative parties are more likely to align themselves with fascist parties because they believe that fascist parties will be able to basically do their dirty work and attack the left and prevent them from accomplishing their goal. Conservative parties think that they can control these fascists. And every single example demonstrates that once conservatives let fascists into the tent, they are unable to control them and the fascists take over. This is what has happened in every single country where fascism is taken over. It is because conservative parties are threatened by the rising power of the left, and they lean on the fascists to help protect the status quo, and it all goes wrong. So there's a lot going on here. And again, I just appreciate I appreciate all your time and your attention. And again, can't wait to hear what your responses are. So I will stop sharing the screen, and we can all start looking at the different questions we've all got.
Well, thank you, Dr. Myers. That was really quite fascinating. I learned some things that I didn't know. So thank you very much for that. I will go through the, let me remind people to raise your hand if you have a question, and that's done in the reactions little button down at the bottom of your screen if you're on a PC, and we will recognize you. And let me get my thing here so I can see. and let you ask your question. There were some things in the chat, as you said. The first one is that I think this country is too big. That can lead to corruption and the building of empires. Do you have any comment on that, Dr. Myers?
You know, it's hard to govern a country this big, not just territorial wise, but population wise. And federalism, our system, really allows for the abuse of power. You know, one of the things that we would talk about if, you know, critical race theory was allowed was how the southern states essentially put together little dictatorships from the end of Reconstruction through really the late 1950s, early 1960s. And so we had states that were functionally one-party dictatorships for multiple generations, for 60, 70, 80 years in this country, all while we were a democracy committed to spreading democracy all around the world and fighting against communism. But meanwhile, we were actually living under dictatorships, or at least a significant portion of the country was. And so kind of like we have to reckon with our own history to try to understand exactly what's been happening and why it would be so easy for us to fall back into that. I mean, we're not that far removed, you know? I mean, like, you know, my parents and grandparents were born in those time periods. I mean, you guys might have been alive during those time periods as well, right? I mean, like, this is not far removed. And so we're not that far away from really falling back to a time that I think, well, most people, I think, would rather forget.
Okay, thank you. I had a quick question was, does the right wing understand that liberal democracy does not mean what it sounds like?
I think one of the hardest things for most people, and I will say especially for my students, is the recognition that democracy doesn't mean that you win all the time.
Right.
It's the expectation that actually most of the time you're going to lose. And so, you know, again, it's this manufacturing of like, hey, well, why did we not win this one? It can't be because we're wrong. It's got to be because all these other things that are stacked against us, right? And so we have to take all these actions in order to finally make sure that the good guys can actually win. But at core of it, it's this basic understanding of just people not wanting to lose and being sore losers. I mean, that sounds like something you teach a child, right? But too many people have lost that message. There's no way that they could be wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's the system's got to be broken.
My concern is that when they hear liberal democracy, they think it means if it's democratic, if it's a democracy, it's liberal.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. You know, and like, that's the thing is like, you hear democracy, you think Democrat, right? You think liberals, like that's liberal ideology, not, you know, and so like all these things have to be bad. Yeah. I mean, this is that idea, I think, and I think like very like right, you know, striking the nail on the head is this impoverished vocabulary idea, right? Like, oh, we're going to take these words and so, oh, they're similar enough. And so they're bad, right?
Right.
And man, if that's the case, and I think, and there's been some interesting work that maybe actually suggests that that's kind of what's happening, we've got some serious problems. Because this is not just about a branding exercise, you know, this is people deeply internalizing the idea of these people are the enemy, these people are bad, and so I cannot in any way support a system that apparently lets those people have power.
We have a number of people raising their hands, but Tom Schreiber put in the chat, and I'll do this one, then we'll go to that raised hand. What I don't understand is what people like Bannon and organizations like Fox News really want. Do they see themselves as advocates of authoritarianism, or do they see themselves as defending core American values, or do they see a difference?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for their, their hearts and minds or anything like that. I mean, in setting aside the profit motivation that is set up for these folks, I mean, outrage does generate views, right? I mean, Fox News has been the #1 cable news network for years, unbroken at this point. But like, I really believe that, and I think that this is the truth of, if we look at like movies, comic books, TV shows, the villains think they're the good guys. They really believe that what they're doing, that they see what other people don't see. And that the only way that like they can like save the world is if they do this crazy thing. But I mean, I really do believe that these folks believe it. I think that they believe that there is this massive conspiracy, or that people on the left, or that people don't agree with them, really are a complete threat to this country, and the only way to stand up for America is to fight them.
Thank you. Bayless, you have your hand up.
Unmute myself. I'm an historian, and I've done some work on my family history, which we're specifically talking about the time during the Confederacy. What was happening with the Battle of Gettysburg, the turning point of the war, so to speak. And I was in 2016, when Trump was running for office, I kept saying that this was basically the rising again of the Confederacy, and which had its fascist elements in it too, of course. And but everybody kept laughing at me like, "Oh, you're crazy! There's no race in America." And and I said, "Well, I'm first of all, I'm Southern. I'm old. My grandfather was born before the Civil War, so." That as you said, we're not that far removed from it.
Yeah.
And it's what I can see a lot more of what was going on than they could see. So they laughed it off. Now they don't laugh about it. Now they're like, oh God, they won't talk to me most of the time, but usually it's occasionally somebody will say, "Damn, you were right, man." But it's I know it's not a perfect analogy. It's not exactly the Confederacy, but it's similar thinking. And one example in my research with my family history was that my mother's ancestor, John Spicer Meadows, was in Company H, 55th North Carolina during Gettysburg, during that battle, the turning point. And on the first 2 days of the battle, 2 people in the company died. 50 people in a company. The third day of the battle, 48 people died. The whole company was wiped out. So I did some analysis, like, why the hell did that happen? And what happened was, according to them, they there was a lot of people debating it because of the hero worship idea. These guys who was the farthest against the Union troops at the time, who made the greatest advances. And there was a story about this, and this Company H, 55th they hid behind Benner's barn and waited for the Union troops to come up to them. And then they all came out from behind the barn screaming and yelling the rebel yell, and they got mowed down all at the same time. Gave their lives for this idea that was dying, and they knew it was dying.
Bayless, you got another minute. You want to get to your question.
So, well, don't really have a question. I just wanted to see the comparison between what's going on here now with MAGA and these guys. I mean, it's the same idea. They don't care about the consequences. They only care about the result, getting what they want. And it's, or they just don't want to live with the result. So.
Thank you, Bayless. We'll move on to David first. Where did you go?
Hey there. I have a friend I frequently debate, and he stumped me and said something to the effect of, why are only conspiracy theories right wing? And I didn't really have a response at the time, and I still can't really think of one that succinctly could win that in a quick 30-second argument. I know you don't have to limit yourself to 30 seconds, but that's kind of the thing, is like, you're when you're debating people, you don't have the ability to sit them down for an hour for PowerPoint presentation. So I guess, how would you reply to that, or come back to that? And then the second thing was just one of your charts. How do you measure the fall in belief in liberal democracy that you had in one of your graphs? So that was the second question. So
Sure. So generally speaking, not all conspiracies are left wing, right? Or not all right wing. I mean, there are some left wing conspiracies out there. The one that just immediately popped to my mind was, of course, that the only reason that we ever invaded like Iraq was for oil, right? So that was popular, and it's been kind of like always kind of like kicking around, right? But the research on this is relatively clear, is that people that find themselves on the right wing find themselves susceptible and interested in conspiracy theories. And so it's a relative, there's more openness. And so because those people on that kind of like that side of the political spectrum, there's more stuff coming from that side, because that side is basically demanding it. I mean, if I can just really simplify it. As far as like, now, I don't know if that's satisfying or not, but as far as like what is driving, Republicans to kind of like tear away from democracy, it's these ideas of, should everyone have the right to vote? Should only certain people have the right to vote? Who's got rights? It's, if your side doesn't win, do you still support the outcome? It's these kind of like almost like basic things that we just kind of like take for granted, that they are increasingly now, at least in surveys, are increasingly peeling away from. And these are these kind of like basic things that you have to have for democracy to work, right? Like, everyone has to be able to participate, and then you got to trust the results and accept them. And people have to have rights, not just the people that you want to have rights. And so like those are the types of things, those are the types of ideas that we're seeing pull away. So again, I don't know if that is satisfying for you, but at least that's kind of what we're seeing.
thank you.
If we have time, I'll share with you my absolute favorite conspiracy thing of all time, and that is it involves Finland. So hopefully we'll have time to circle back to that.
Oh, go ahead, do it now.
Okay, so the idea is that Finland is not a real country. Okay, it's actually like a giant conspiracy theory between the Russians and the Japanese. And so what Finland actually is open waters that are predominantly the mating and hunting grounds of whales. And so what the Japanese, because they want access to whales, right, for their fins, right, is that they kill all the whales in the water that would be Finland, okay, and then allow the Russians to actually take the whale meat in order to help feed the population. And this has been going on since the end of World War II. So
Okay.
sorry if anyone's been to Helsinki. It was a massive conspiracy. You were probably just in Sweden East, but not Finland. It's not a real place. So again, why do people believe this? And again, their evidence is, listen, it's Finland. It's in the name, right? It's just a way to cover up the whole. Again, there doesn't have to be a whole lot of logic with conspiracy theories. That's the whole point, right? But like, this is the kind of thing that's out there.
I never heard that one.
If you have time, you can Google it and you can go down a really deep hole.
You mean it's not a hollow suite like Brent said?
Yes.
Dr. Pilzer? You would unmute and ask your question. I do want to remind everybody that you get 3 minutes to ask your question.
Okay, very good. Oh, no problem. The big question is, we have an oligarchy in this country that's controlling everything. I don't care what you're going to say, but the super rich is controlling what's going on. We just don't see through, it's like putting blind shades there and, not understanding what's really happening. But this oligarchy is controlling what's going on. As you know, they can't do much about it, but I want to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, money is incredibly important in politics. It is become in a lot of ways, pretty cancerous. It allows really wealthy people to basically structure our entire politics, what things matter, what issues get talked about, what things don't get talked about, because people don't have to worry about appealing to their constituencies, right? Because they just get funded by someone with a ton of money, and then they win their primary, and then people that don't really pay attention are like, well, that's the person with the D or the R next to their name, so I'm going to vote for them. So that it's short-circuited the idea of real accountability, and it is incredibly problematic. One of the big things that we hear on the left all the time is how Citizens United, the Supreme Court case, ushered in really an era of dark money. We had dark money before, but it's kind of unprecedented now. And really it's under the guise of being able to protect freedom of speech. But this is not what his freedom of speech has ever meant. And again, the idea that you can have, even if you play with the idea of the marketplace of ideas is your core analogy, what you're essentially doing with how allowing unlimited money into our system is saying that someone can basically walk into that marketplace with the biggest bullhorn, surround the entire place by speakers, and just start talking, and they will drown out literally everyone else. So there is no marketplace, because that marketplace has now, if we were economists, we'd be talking about market failure. And so when we have a number of people, a small number of people that are continuing to kind of like have a stranglehold over money going into elections, we have a market failure for political discourse in this country, and we're seeing it.
Thank you. Dr. Pilzer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
That would be me. Well, fascinating discussion, I have to say. And let me straighten you out on the Finnish question. Actually, Popeye has the real answers, because as you might recall, he was strong to the Finnish. That having been said, however, a more serious issue, it seems to me, is that I find that women's equality presents the most difficult challenge of our time, because men are reacting to it in such a way that it, as you referred to earlier, it raises male sexual anxieties. And this is the reason why we see Trump rallies predominantly populated by men and Democratic rallies by women. And there's a great divide emerging here And it seems to me that the impetus and impulse connected to the male party is going to be the most dangerous thing, because the image of males is one who can take control, who has a gun perhaps, and can exercise power. And it's more complicated than that, of course. But it seems to me that we have to find a way to reconcile the necessity of women's equality with the kind of problems it raises for the male psyche as we go through history. What do you think about this proposition?
I don't think I could have said it better. I think that is without a doubt one of the most pressing dynamics that's been underlying this entire thing. We talk about abortion bans. A lot of this stuff, I mean, at a most fundamental level, is that we have structured our society, and I would say most societies, around the idea of women needing men. And when women stop needing men, well then, what if you're some guy, why would a woman want to be with you, right? If you're competing with her for jobs and status and whatever else, what are you bringing to the table? And before, all you had to do was just be a man. And so this attack fundamentally on men being men, male masculinity, the idea that I'm the provider, right? That I'm the one that's going to be in charge, that I'm going to protect you, right? It is fundamentally undercut by women's increasing status and independence in this country and around the world. Women are the most important constituency for the Democratic Party. They're their number one most important constituency. They are not a really important constituency for the Republican Party, as you noted. And it shows up in how both parties and their leaders talk about women in their policies that either benefit or attack and undermine the position of women. And it is without a doubt a continuing building crisis.
Does that answer your question, Jim?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Reinhardt?
Okay, I was in the process of unmuting. First of all, I think it was Gloria Steinem who said that a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. In any case, I was wondering if you could recommend a good source of information on the best way and the best place to flee.
I don't know. I think everyone's thinking New Zealand, right?
Yeah.
If we can get in, let's go. Let's all charter a boat.
And here we come.
Forget about Canada. They've already arrived before you.
Yeah, that's true. They blocked off all the entry points, right? Or
Yeah.
for the moment.
Please remember to make sure you raise your hand, because people have raised their hands and waited patiently to make comments and to talk to the doctor.
Is there any good literature on the subject of the best way to flee the country? I mean, you have to get your money out, and, or any other.
I am well. I mean, I'm sure there is. I'm just less familiar with those. And I would just say that this is not the time to kind of like pack up our bags and go. This is the time to dig on our heels and fight, and not like fight like they're talking about. I mean, we have to. I mean, this abandoning everything to like this group of people would be just an absolute catastrophe for the world. And the rest of the world, pays so close attention to everything that happens in this country on a daily basis. Like what happens here is their front page news, is their lead story in every capital in every country around the world. They're watching us and they're watching this happen and they're wondering who we really are. And I think we not only owe it to ourselves, but we owe it to everything that we've been building to not let this go down this way.
Anything else, Joe?
No, I won't argue with that. I just don't see myself manning the barricades, that's all.
Yeah, me either. Done that too many times in the past.
Run away.
But that's the thing is like, you know, we don't have to fight like physical, right? It's fighting by talking, having conversations, writing op-eds, right? Like going, you know, protesting, organizing so that people can understand what's going on, right? I mean, the information matters. And like, we can do all of this very peacefully, very effectively, and hold to our values.
Mhm. It just makes you easier to find.
Amy?
Okay, so 9 years ago, I moved here from Texas because I was just really tired of whispering the words like atheist or Democrat. You know, I didn't live in Austin, obviously. So come to Florida. And I love it here. I hate cold weather. Hate it. I don't know where to go next. I don't know where to go because I really, you know, I was at a party last night, actually, outdoor party, fire pit party. And I'm watching some interactions for some reason. I just watch people as social experiments in my mind sometimes. I think we all do that a little bit. But I look at Democrats as going for the better nature in us, okay? And somehow the Republicans have tapped upon, okay, we don't have to go against their worst nature, but just let's get to their base nature. Fear of anybody who's different, okay? Okay, they're gonna call it racism, but we're just gonna call it logical. Fear of women, well, they're obviously weaker because they go through this terrible, debilitating process called pregnancy. So that makes them weak. They need protecting, and sometimes they just don't know it. You know, I just feel like these are base things. So how do you combat things that all of us feel, but we know that's our base nature? You know, get rid of that. I go to a party and there's somebody there I wouldn't invite on my street, much less have in my home. But I don't come out and say that to the host. I don't, you know, we learn how to get along to get along. And what do we do? What do we do? I mean, I think it's really a boon. What is it that Fox News has really hit on the way to communicate to our base natures, right? Use loud voices, get upset, get enraged. I don't see, you know, a lot of people getting enraged on CNN. I see them saying, this enrages me, but it's different.
About 30 seconds, Linda.
I'm done.
Okay,
I'm done.
thank
I'm
you.
done.
Yeah, I mean, I think the emotional dynamics are as stark as you've painted it on both sides, right? Republicans are always in emergency mode, always in crisis mode, always upset, always using the most striking language possible to paint a very clear picture about problems and who's responsible. And Democrats are more cerebral, more calm, and you know, are just less likely to be kind of like this level of direct and inflammatory with their use of language. And it is creating some huge problems. Democrats are not being able to effectively communicate their ideas and to effectively be able to slap down obvious lies and falsehoods. And we are suffering as a country for it. Like, this should not be difficult. This should not be difficult to push back on these things. And yet, every time I see an elected Democrat on TV or their quotes in newspapers or anything else, they just can't quite put it together. And it is constantly frustrating.
I mean, we could have a Democrat out there saying, I have kids. I want them to have a healthy, long life, and we don't.
Right.
You know, someone who's getting enraged out there about climate change, not just we need to do something. And we have some facts here. That's not appealing to that. Anyway, I'm done. Sorry. James.
Will they eventually and just fizzle out? Because that takes a lot of energy.
Hey, we have people waiting to ask questions.
I'm just offering something.
Thank you, Linda. Jim Young, if you want to unmute yourself.
I have been studying fascism for quite a long while. In fact, I've been an activist, a human rights activist, going back for the last 20 years. And I have actively campaigned against Christian fascism. And I've drawn a lot of ire from both the right and the left, because I dare refer to Christianity as a fascist ideology. But I do study, and I have purchased Dr. Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, and I have studied it. And I also watch a lot of YouTube videos on the topic of fascism. And I watch the independent news sources as well as MSNBC and CNN. One of the things that I have noticed, of two things I want to point out, is recently I have begun to hear mainstream news commentators use the term fascist and fascism in reference to the Republican Party and their agenda, using that term in the mainstream news to describe the Republican Party. Secondly, I have also watched a lot of YouTube videos, and I have noticed pushback from the right, flipping the narrative on its head and accusing the left of being fascist. So there are videos called left-wing fascism on YouTube. And if you watch them, if it's a demagogue who essentially takes every talking point of the progressive left and characterizes that talking point as a fascist trait, a characteristic of fascism. And it's, you might think, oh, well, that's hilarious. It's not hilarious.
You got 30 seconds, Jim.
Okay, it's extremely disturbing, in fact. I'm done.
Thank you.
I mean, so yeah, there's a lot to bite off there. You know, there's an awful lot of projection on the right that like they see what they are. And like this has been kind of like substantiated in a lot of research studies. And so kind of like whatever they're focusing on is kind of like a reflection of like their kind of like deeply held ideas and in some senses insecurities and stuff. And so like this idea of like, you're not fascist, like we're not fascist, you're fascist is certainly consistent with that idea. I think there is a real reluctance to talk about fascism because people automatically connect fascism with Nazism. And again, people on the right are like, well, Nazism can't be right wing because they were committed to the tenets of National Socialism. Again, it's this impoverishment of ideas and anti-intellectualism. It's like they're saying, oh, it's socialism, so therefore that's Nazism, so therefore that's the left, right? The only thing to do is to push back on these things and to continue to try to help people understand what's going on, but not letting anything pass. And ultimately, I think like that's the largely the institutional failure of the media in this country. But again, like they're incentivized largely to do whatever is going to drive money, right? Because it's a market. But Democratic politicians, I'm only aware of maybe one that regularly calls out fascism. And, it's not helpful, right? Like there needs to be a more consistent understanding about what we've got going on here and pointing stuff out when it's happened, right? Like Ted Cruz tweeted today that some affiliate of Jeffrey Epstein was found dead. And so he tweeted out, anybody know what Hillary Clinton was doing on Saturday night? It's just like this continued garbage, right? It's like, this is that stuff. And so Democrats need to wake up and start being really aware of the real threat. Otherwise, again, they're going to wake up and it's going to be too late. And it's already becoming too late in the day in a lot of states around the country.
Yes, it is. I have one quick question, and that is, do you think that the participation of these Christian nationalists, the basically fundamentalist churches, of which mostly are occupied by Republicans or right-wing Christian nationalist kind of people, does the simple solutions that Christianity offers in that case tend to make them more susceptible to the fascist view that you have to have a strong man and there are distinct and literal roles that women and men are to play?
Yeah, I mean, I think that builds off nicely what Jim's point earlier was, and I think actually is more or less builds off that Sinclair Lewis book, It Can't Happen Here, who he was writing and saying, listen, when fascism comes to America, it's going to be draped in a flag wearing a cross.
Yeah.
And so, certainly more of the evangelical Christians, their belief system is more predicated on this idea that women need to be subservient to their husbands, that there's one person that needs to be in charge of making household decisions, and it's the man, right? And certainly when you go through wedding ceremonies, as maybe you've gone to wedding ceremonies, I mean, I certainly have, and their wedding vows are different, right? They command obedience of the woman to her husband.
Yeah.
And certainly that is, fits in very nicely with how we think about fascism as a larger kind of like structure for like integrating and thinking through ideas. And so it is not surprising to me that there is some connection there. Again, not suggesting that Christianity by itself automatically means fascism.
Right.
Right. Just like if you said that if you were a follower of Islam, that automatically means terrorism. Right. But we all know that the roots of groups like the Ku Klux Klan were rooted in Christian nationalism, a very warped sense of Christianity. And I tell my students that if you want to understand the historical analog to ISIS, it's the KKK. The KKK was a radical right-wing Christian terrorist group.
Yeah.
And so absolutely, certainly, I think those connections can be drawn.
Michael had one interesting question before we close the public part of this and go to our room. Is there any attempt to study this from a non-political view? Are there other forces at work here that seem to coalesce around the political view, but could be something else?
It's really hard to talk about this stuff and like divorce it from politics, because ultimately, even if we were just thinking about how these ideas play out in like just kind of like informal social settings, or if we were thinking about in terms of like how organizations work, even just economics and things like that, ultimately fascism is about taking real political power to be able to fundamentally restructure and organize society in a way that is consistent with that particular, again, flavor of fascism. And so even if you for those of those are familiar with Bill Shire's like The Rise and the Fall of the Nazi Party, of Nazism in Germany. Hitler started off by focusing more on social clubs, right? And then once he started kind of like getting that following in these more kind of like social casual atmospheres, then it kind of starts bleeding into the political, right? You start taking action, right? And that's the thing, is that there's no way to get this to be separate from politics. It is intimately intertwined. It has to be.
Yeah, thank you.
If you are pleased with our programs, please tap the like button and then subscribe to our channel. Don't forget the bell so you don't miss any notices of new material. We usually post new content every week. See our created playlists to discover events thus far this year, or to see a list of topics and speakers from our rapidly growing and diverse collection since 1992.